The surprise is this surah. It's Surah Al-A'raf. We've actually been doing this for a long time. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, you guys. We Surah Al-A'raf. We're still on Surah Al-A'raf, ayah 57. So that's really good. We passed a lot from that surah, and we talked about Ud'u Rabbakum تضرعا وخفية إنه لا يحب المعتدين. And what I like, I got you guys a new Quran, and what I like about this, you could see some different colors in it. And this Quran is actually based on the subjects. So you could see like the purple subjects, the purple color, or the ayat that relate to da'wah, and the light blue colors, the ones that you see in front of you here, are relating to the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you would have the orange, I forgot what it was. Yeah, so it's evidences about Judgment Day, and talks about death and akhirah. The yellow ones are basically the prophets, and it talks about the stories of the prophets. So I wanted you guys to look at that. Since we looked at the yellow, yellow, sorry, the yellow ones. There's stories about the prophets. You could see. I want you guys to look at that kind of pattern that you see. So you could see in where the green, there's some like Jannah and Nar and those topics, and you could see those patterns of like pink and light green and etc. The patterns are basically telling you how the stories are taking place. The purple tends to most of the times be the theme of the whole story. So you could see, for example, I'm just going to scroll really quick so you could see the light orange ones are basically the different signs of the prophets, the different things about prophets, peace be upon them. Or actually, hold on. No, those are the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the light, these colors right there, I don't know, beige, light white, gray, whatever it is. They're basically stories of the prophets. And you could see they do actually give like every single prophet, well, not every single prophet a color, but they do variants so that you could see how the amount is. So this is Prophet Nuh all the way up to this color, and then the prophet 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 Ad, Prophet Hud alayhi salam, who was sent to Ad. You could see there in the yellow right there, a number of ayat, and then we go back in order to differentiate between this prophet and the coming prophet, which is Prophet Salih right there. You could see that it continues, and then Prophet Lut right there. So then they're giving you the variant in colors for you to actually see the pattern in which prophets were actually mentioned. So then Shu'aib alayhi salam, and then it continues, and then it gives you the theme. So after a number of different prophets, one after another, we just mentioned them right there. Then the purple right there, it gives you the theme. After these stories were mentioned, it gives you the theme in light purple. Usually, the light purple is the theme, so it makes it easier for you to actually look at the tafsir. So this really helps you with that tafsir. And then it goes again to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, that is etc. Then it continues the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam in that gray, and then it gives you a theme about Prophet Musa alayhi salam, a little one right there, and then it continues. You could see the from theme to the story, from theme to the story, and of course it's really important to look at that, especially when we're talking about Surah Al-A'raf. There's a lot of there's a lot of storytelling in order for you to get to the theme. The Quran uses the story as a way of learning the wisdom and spreading and teaching the wisdom right there. So still a Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And I want you to realize here, when just a fast observation, we could see how Prophet Musa alayhi salam took pretty much the most segment from Surah Al-A'raf when it comes to speaking about the prophet. So he took the most. So if we look at all those yellows and all those pages were really Prophet Musa. Yet we saw how Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was a very small segment, and you could see we're still in see all those light blue and the light yellow and dark yellow are still Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And then even though they put it here in light purple, but it's really still on the same subject with Prophet Musa alayhi salam, but relating it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then it continues again with Prophet Musa alayhi salam. At the very end, you could see we're still in Surah Al-A'raf, and still with Prophet Musa alayhi salam till the very end. Of course, Surah Al-A'raf is 206 ayat, and you could see then the light purple and the purple right there. Then that theme, we go back to the theme with to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and what the theme we learned from that, and the prophets and the other prophets. So you could see with those colors, it kind of gives us, especially for those the people that are visual, it helps you see how the surah is really going. And then the light blue, it would be really talking about the akhirah, in order to connect between the stories of the prophets, the message, and the theme that is intended to send within those surahs. So you could see right there 206 ayat, and you could see how those colors, I loved it when I saw those colors and the variants, and it helps you kind of visualize how the ayat and how the flow is actually taking place. It helps you actually see that flow, and especially for those that are really visual learners, you could see with the colors, it kind of helps you see how the ayat and how the stories are unfolding in the surah. So we're going to go back to that page that we were on, which is ayah 57. And you could see with ayah 57, then it went from the theme, and the theme was, here we go, the theme was وَلَقَدْ جِئْنَاهُمْ بِكِتَابٍ فَصَّلْنَاهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةٍ. And that was the theme. And the theme, we talked about it last time, how it was talking about the Sharia. I was talking about the Sharia, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the prophets, جِئْنَاهُمْ, so the previous nations as well, how they were sent with the theme. And it's really important here, بِكِتَابٍ فَصَّلْنَاهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ. We talked about that Sharia was actually coming with ilm. In other words, the Sharia was not laying out as a do's and don'ts for the sake of do's and don'ts, but it was actually laying out Sharia for the sake of mankind. It was because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the knowledge for what is best for man, and of course it is actually to guide him, which really is for the main purpose of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created life for. ورحمة, and also it's a mercy. لقوم يؤمنون هل ينظرون إلا تأويله. We talked about those, and of course then it continues from giving the theme to laying out the evidences. Now here's that light gray right there, laying out the evidences after putting the theme in where. So what is the evidence to why we should obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, it then laid out the evidence, and actually started from the creation of the heavens and the creation of the earth, and that the one that has the ability to create the heavens and the earth, and then also has the ability to control their function, which is al-layl and nahar, night and day, and how not only control their function, but even control their existence and their presence, which actually relates to man's life. So in other words, the one that actually made life possible for man, and through whether the sun, the moon, the stars, the night, the day, the one that made those objects and that life be possible for man to live on earth, with mercy and have all the different things that help man survive. The one that was behind all those different creations is really the same one, and that's why it said ألا له الخلق والأمر. Isn't the one that or the one that has the one that created is the one that has the right and the power to give orders. So in other words, just like he gave orders for the whole creation of all the different things that made life happen, he definitely would have the right, and the only one to have the right to define justice and define what man should be doing, which is il amr. In other words, he's the only one that deserves the full obedience, because anyways, if he had created the different things in the different things that surround man, and without these different items that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, day, night, skies, heavens, etc., then that, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all that with knowledge and made those different items for the sake of him living a stable life, which is huda, which is guidance, and also for him to not only live a stable life, but for him to live in mercy. So that, what they call it, I think they call it the earth and life on earth compared to the other planets. They basically called it based on that soup, that bear, and what is it called, the girl in Goldilocks, the Goldilocks planet, or something like that. All right, so that's the same thing, and where it actually has all the different things that you need. It is just right. It is just right. So having that being said, you could see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, from that theme, from laying out the different creations, from laying out those different creations, comes to, well, based on that, ادعوا ربكم تضرعا وخفيا. Well, that's why the Lord Almighty has the right to, since He created, He has the right to be obeyed. Then therefore, ud'u, and we talked about ud'u being to mean worship, and we talked about ud'u to mean to invoke. And of course, invocating, that is dua, is actually a part, our invocation, of course, is actually a part of worship. But worship is a lot more comprehensive than just dua. Worship, what actually comes from the same amr, from obedience to the Lord Almighty. So worship, in its comprehensive definition, let's call it that way, tadarru'a wa khufya, in where there's the public side, there has to be that khushu', that sincerity when you're practicing that worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and khufya, and even in your private times, there's also that worship that you should be performing, that you can perform, but it must be sincere. So regardless of whether it is public or whether it is in person, in private, it is supposed to be sincere, and it is supposed to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إنه لا يحب المعتدين. We talked about المعتدين to being transgressors, and what it has to do in the context of this ayah, in where the person can be doing some worship, whether or invocation, and actually harming others. And we talked about the deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, the mal. We talked about that. Now it continues, ولا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها, in where if the interpretation or the tafsir, ud'u to mean the ritual, this then would explain ولا تفسدوا. So this would be that amal salih, that iman, and this would be amal salih, iman, in where when it comes to ritual, you're actually being sincere, tadarru'an wa khufya. You're making that sincere ibadah, that sincere worship, tadarru'an, with sincerity to the Lord Almighty, whether it was in public or in private. But then you cannot separate between al-iman and al-amal al-salih. So then it continues with the ritual. It should be with sincerity, but yet that should not at all be separated from al-amal al-salih, which is how you behave how you behave on earth. And that's why the ayah said, وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. Well, this explains, so when it comes to iman, which is these two categories, right? Well, this category in that ayah, then this is al-amal al-salih. In other words, there's no way that you can separate between al-amal al-salih slash, that is, al-amal al-salih, العمل الصالح, to mean piety and being doing the right thing in your behavior and how you live on earth, which actually would mean part of what, how do we define justice, and how do we relate in our social dynamics with the society around us, and what are we supposed to be doing. So the ayah says, وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, don't cause fasad. And we talked about fasad, and we said it is simply, Fasad is simply bringing in destruction. And we talked about the destruction and said, well, anything that goes against the function that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it in, that is a form of fasad. So if the person, for example, goes against deen, that would, it goes against the deen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in our fitrah, had created in our instinct, that would be considered going against the fitrah, going against the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, and therefore it would be considered a form of destruction, a form of fasad. If the person goes against killing, let's say, we talked about that nafs, and the person would cause, probably going against people's lives. Let me put it right here, DNAIM, and the person started causing harm to people's lives, that would be a form of destruction. And the same thing when we're talking about mind, where you're going against the function of the mind and what it is supposed to be doing, and how to maintain its health, how to maintain good education, etc. Same thing when we're talking about ird, where you go against the function that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created between male and female. That is going to be a form of destruction, because simply you're going against the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out within this creation. So that would be called fasad, or destruction in this world, and it's a form of i'tida, it's a form of transgression. وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, because this actually, and the same thing with money, by the way, with economy, the person, by going against the rules of justice in how we relate with transactions, with economy, with money, and causing those types of transgressions against the justice that was laid out by the Lord Almighty in terms of economy, that would be a form of destruction as well. In other words, when we're talking about destruction in the world, we're not necessarily just talking about killing people, because that's too narrow in the definition of destruction. The definition of destruction is actually a lot more comprehensive than that. And therefore, to understand that definition of um, that definition of fasad, or deconstructing the world, it's deconstructing. If you are basically going against the pattern that the Lord Almighty had created the world in, that in itself is destruction. So when you go against, you do deconstruct the way God Almighty created the pattern in this world, is a form of destruction. And here we go, we continue, وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, that in, even when we're talking about how we live our life in this world, when we're talking about how we understand justice and how we live justice in this world, وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, which again, the word idruhu, we talked about this before, could be ibadah, could be in the worship, it could also be the other segment, which is invocation. And whether we say it's invocation or whether it's in ibadah, it would actually have, a slightly different context, a slightly different interpretation. But in the end, is that, notice here that the dua here, it talked about tadarru'a wa khufya, and here it talked about al khawf and al tama'. The difference is slightly different, in where here this is focusing on the inner part of invocation, the inner part of the spirituality and the relationship in the spirituality on the inside of us, versus here this is more talking about This is more talking about the psychology that is motivating us to take a certain action. So there's a difference. The motivation that's making us take a certain action, whether that action is ritual or whether that action is ritual and that is, a spiritual connection, or whether that action was a behavioral one. So what's the difference? So if we're talking about the ritual part, in where, for example, we gave this example last time, khawfa wa tama'a, so the person is afraid and feeling that, I don't know, a hurricane is coming at their house and they're afraid that they're going to die in this hurricane or whatever, and then they start invoking the Lord Almighty to protect them from this hurricane or from cancer, whatever it is. This is a form of invocation, and the motivation behind it, or the motive behind it, is really fear. And the other part is tama. So is that a type of worship? It is a type of worship. To worship the Lord Almighty due to fear is a type of worship, but it must be tadarruan wa khufya. Tadarruan wa khufya, whether it is done in public or whether it is done in private, it must always contain sincerity. The other part, which is a tama'a. Tama'a is when you seek gain, when you seek a benefit, and it could be a worldly benefit, a mundane benefit, and it could also be a benefit in the akhirah, some kind of a gain. So when we look at tama'a, whether we're talking about invocation or whether we're talking about sorry about that, or whether we're talking about worship. So worship, for example, the person is worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might actually punish them if they don't pray. That's a form of khawf. That is a considerable reason. That would be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would also reward for. On the other hand, somebody might worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they want Jannah. Let's do another example. ادعوه خوفا وطمعا. The person might actually make worship, and we're talking about here the comprehensive term worship, in where the way they practice their Islam. So the sister, for example, is wearing her hijab because she felt, well, this keeps me safer. And this brother is lowering his gaze because he felt that that would keep his heart safer, and or because he's afraid that he might not be able to control himself or herself. And here, in that situation, she's afraid, or he's afraid, of the consequences of not lowering the gaze. That is also a good reason to actually practice Islam. This is a form of reconnection and building a spirituality within the Muslim. Same thing when we're looking at tama'a. So the reason why, for example, I'm doing things the halal way, because I want to make sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bless and preserve the good things that I have worked hard for. This is just an example. Inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. Let's continue those ayat. Inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. Right there. And what is that basically relating to? Well, this is basically relating to the same ayah that we were talking about here in the beginning. Hold on, let me just remove this one to... Hold on, just give me this one. It helps me focus on it. If you actually look of it, it was focusing on that rahmah. There's a special emphasis in these ayat to focus on the rahmah, and that here again it emphasized that again, inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. What is that really emphasizing? That when a person does the dua il khawf, whether for the motive was because of fear or to gain something, or whether they were doing tadarru', or the prayer in public, or tadarru' with lots of khushu' and in private, in the end is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like he created this world and everything in his mercy, and that's the same thing in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. The mercy of the Lord Almighty is near al-muhsinin. Now remember, we talked about al-muhsinin, we talked about the different stages of al-muhsinin, or the different stages of iman. We said Islam, there's iman, the level of iman, and there's the level of ihsan. Islam, the person is abiding by the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes they might miss out. But then we also talked about from Hadith Jibril, and we went in details with that. So you can go back to the notes now, or the notes, or the previous video. Now, when we look at Inna Rahmatullahi Qareebun min al Muhsinin, where we could see that it continues wa huwa alladhi. I want you to look at that wa. The wa is telling you that this is connecting. So you would want to link the wa, that means it's linking it to another part of the ayah. Which part is it linking it to? So it's really linking this ayah with this ayah. So after putting a theme, even though if you would ask me, I would probably color this purple based on the color codes in this Quran. I would probably color this segment as purple because this is actually a theme. After telling us the different ayat and the different evidences, then it continues to tell me a theme. So now the theme is really this part. So now you know, well, now you know the evidences about the existence of your Lord Almighty. Now lay out that report, and here's the report right there. But then this segment of it, you could see when it went and said, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ. It is actually to complete what it was talking about in these ayat. What was it talking about? Remember, it was actually talking about the creation of the earth, creation of the heavens, and it was talking about the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created which made life possible. So then it continues after saying, Inna rahmatullahi qareebun min al muhsinin. It's telling you, well, how near is it really talking about? How near is the mercy of the Lord Almighty? Well, it is near as your breath. What does that mean? And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ. Again, a special emphasis on the rahmah again after talking about rahmah. Again, it says it again. So what does it mean? That the Lord Almighty is the one that sends riyah. Riyah are basically the different winds. Now, when you look at the wind, that's basically what you breathe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, you know what? You recognize mercy. Well, the mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, is not only near, but it is as near as the air that you breathe. With every single wind, with every single air, exhale and inhale that you take, it is by the mercy of the Lord Almighty. A very beautiful thing Shara we laid out. I was listening to him the other day in his tafsir, and he was saying how the more different items our life depends on, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it available, and of course reduces people's authority over it. Let me explain that and what he was trying to say. He was saying we can't go without air more than, I think it's 15 minutes or something like that. And it's just minutes. We can't be without air for minutes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made air so available that it would be extremely hard for you to remove air, or to even take air out of something. Same thing when we're talking about water. Our life, we can stay without water for probably 4 days, 3-4 days. It depends on your age and your body and etc. But just a matter of days. But then made water available. Made water available less than air. But then when it comes to food, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it available, and because it is something that people can control, but you would still have the ability to survive without food for a number of days. But then when you look at money, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made your air, your water, and your food available around you, even from grounds that grow the food and everything. But when it came to money, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regulated money and how people control money. But then that is that mismanagement that people, that injustice that people do when it came to money, and how they wanted to keep the wealth to themselves. And that's why you would see uh, the the destruction on earth when it comes to money, and how when justice is left to people, how much destruction they could do. But when justice and rahmah is left to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the earth grows the food that man needs. It has it there. The earth has the air that man, and the water is also there for man to survive. But when man is given the power to control and redefine justice, that's when things go wrong. Now, it's not that the earth doesn't have, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدَّرَ فِيهَا أَقْوَاتَهَا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given already the provisions, had given already the different food capacities that the humans need to survive. It's just that people choose to keep things for themselves, or at least choose to do that hikr, choose to do that, and to choose to do that what is it called, where they're not actually giving others, they're not sharing, they're not passing on. They would rather dump it in the ocean than actually send it to probably Africa or Asia or whatever country, because it's not necessarily the earth that's not having the wealth for, or the wealth or the food or the produce for people to survive. It's that people are doing that imbalance. They're the ones that are causing the imbalance, and it's not that the earth doesn't have it. Monopoly. There you go. All right, so let's continue. حتى إذا أقلت سحابا. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying out, well, if you see that even the mercy is even in the air that you breathe, حتى إذا أقلت سحابا, then it continues to even show you the mercy of the Lord Almighty. And when this riyah, when this wind would actually move and push the clouds that are heavy and full with rain, سُقْنَاهُ لِبَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ, that the winds will drive, the word سُقْنَاهُ, it's like they're driving the clouds towards a dead city. In a dead city, the clouds would release the water, the أنزلنا به الماء, the clouds would release the water, and as a result, what will come out of the grounds is really thamarat, are really different produces, that help man survive. That's where you see that riyah is going all around you. And the mercy of the Lord Almighty is not only all around you, and by the mercy of the Lord Almighty you inhale and exhale, but even by the mercy of the Lord Almighty there's water from up above you, and the water brings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings it down, and you would get from the mercy of the Lord Almighty food from underneath you. In other words, the mercy of the Lord Almighty is not only surrounding you, let's say east and west, but it's even surrounding you from above and underneath. And therefore, inna rahmatallahi qareeb, the mercy of your Lord is near. And كذلك نخرج الموتى. But then here's the theme. We would color that probably in purple, where there's the theme. كذلك نخرج الموتى. In where, yes, it is added to the different parts and the different evidences of the existence of the Lord Almighty. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also seizing the moment in those ayat to tell you, well, just like the mercy of your Lord is really what brings you the food, the air, the water that you need. Of course, here we go. Here's the air. Here's the, let's look at them right there and just look at them. Here's the air. That's the air that you need to breathe. And here's the water, which is in the clouds. And of course, here's the thamarat. Here's the food. You need the air, water, and food in order to help you survive. well, you may focus on the survival part, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, you see the way that you survive? Well, the way that you survive in the same exact pattern in where life takes place and comes into existence is exactly the same pattern of how resurrection will also take place. The one that is capable of making a dead soil or dead soil into being full of life with plants and full of life with even animals and even different things, different creatures to live, and even yourself. Well, that's the same thing that the Lord Almighty is capable of bringing in not only life to earth, but He's capable of bringing in life to the people. كذلك نخرج الموتى. So here, كذلك would mean, and in that same manner, in that same power, in that same ability, نخرج الموتى, the dead would be resurrected. لعلكم تذكرون, in order for you to remember. Perhaps you could remember, perhaps you could realize, perhaps تذكرون. The word تذكرون, well, wait a minute, تذكرون, and why not? When we look at تذكرون, why is it لعلكم تعلمون? Maybe for you to know, for your information, that is. Why لعلكم تذكرون? So لعلكم تذكرون, the word تذكر actually comes from the word ذكر. Remember. When we look at remembering what? Did we actually die before? And then this is to remind us of that? Well, yes, absolutely. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us in Surah Al-Zumar that they would say, رَبَّنَا أَمَتَّنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ وَأَحْيَيْتَنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ. Ya Allah, you created us twice. You made us dead twice, and you created us twice. So here, تذكرون, it's like, well, remember when one day you too were also dead? Remember when you weren't even existent? So this is to tell us, لعلكم تذكرون. It's like, just like the pattern and the same exact way of how you were brought to life in the life that you are in right now. Well, remember the same exact pattern in the way you were brought to life, the same exact pattern you will also be brought to life again. You will be brought to life again with that same pattern, that same power of the Lord Almighty that brings this earth to life again. So this is just to comment on the word تذكرون. Let's continue. والبلد الطيب والبلد الطيب يخرج نباته بإذن ربه. Now when we look at والبلد الطيب, now again, والبلد الطيب, البلد الطيب, البلد, this is not necessarily referring to the city per se, but this is more referring to the land that makes a city. All right, it's really referring to the land that makes the city, and that's why it said وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ, the good city, the good city. Why did it happen to be a city? Well, it really became a city because there were people gathering in it, because there was life coming in it, and that's what made it that balad. That's what made it that city. الطيب, the good city, the good land. يخرج نباته, the produce in it, the plants in it, they would come out with the order and with the power بإذن ربه, with the power and the mighty of the Lord Almighty. والذي خبث, as for, now you look at الطيب and الخبيث. Okay, let's look at this one. There's a طيب and there's a خبيث. Those are antonyms. All right, this word is the opposite of that word. All right, so البلد الطيب, it's comparing a good city would actually have, in other words, it would obey how the Lord Almighty is sending the wind, the water, and what brings the water, which is of course الماء, water right there, and also the food. And that would be a good city. It is actually responding to the Lord Almighty's orders by making produce, by making food. وَالَّذِي خَبُثَ لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِدًا. As for the bad city, quote unquote, or خَبُثَ, it's not the best. لا يخرج إلا نكدة. When it comes out, it doesn't come out the good kind. It doesn't إلا نكدة. It is نكدة, and the word نكدة you could see والذي خبث لا يخرج إلا نكدة. When we look at the word نكدة, it's like it's hard, and that's why you look at the plants that grow in the desert area. They're usually thorny, they're usually hard, they're usually not as gentle and soft as the plants that grow in fertile, and of course even with lots of water areas. You could see that difference. So nakida, in where it is actually asir, it is hard, it's not the best. All right. كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون. كذلك, again here's a كذلك, again here's a كذلك. What is كذلك for? Well, كذلك is in order for you to recognize the patterns. The Quran is always telling you about patterns. All right, always telling you about patterns. It's like, okay, you want to see how things happen, look at the pattern. Based on the pattern, now you get the picture. Now you understand what is coming next. In other words, it tells you the past in order for you to know the future. It tells you how the order happens in order for you to know what is coming up. What's coming up in your life as well. So there are scholars that actually said that this is actually, yes, referring to Il Balad Tayyib. It's referring to the city, or slash, it's really referring to, metaphorically, it's referring to the land and the types of lands. But then there are other scholars that said, well, that's not talking about the land per se, but this is actually giving a comparison to what even humans would be like. The people that actually took the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obeyed the Lord Almighty are the ones that are actually like full of fruits. They're the ones that are like full of fruits. They're the ones that are smooth, that are sweet, that are soft, that are gentle, and the ones that reject the Lord Almighty, they're the khabith. They're the ones that are disobeying the Lord Almighty. They're the ones that are khabith. They're thorny. They're hard. Their hearts are hard. Their inside is hard. Their outside is hard. They're thorny. And in the end, compare this with that, and which is really similar. This interpretation has something to back it, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually describes that مثل كلمة طيبة, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives that comparison, that the word that كلمة طيبة, the good word, in where أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء, its roots are deep inside, وفرعها في السماء, which is of course لا إله إلا الله. When they're taking the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could see that they are actually strong, they're formidable, and they're rooted with strong foundations. And فرعها في السماء, and they're strong, and they're even the branches they lay out because they have a strong foundation, and their life is based on the principles of that the Lord Almighty laid out. And that's why they would actually stand out, and they would stand up, and they would be those that are looking bright and strong and looking healthy, because their life is healthy, because they actually take the foundation from the Sharia that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped them find guidance, and therefore they're able to take in their water or their resources from the resources of the Lord Almighty. This is an interpretation, I find it kind of strange, but it's something that some scholars had mentioned, so I'm just gonna lay it out right here just to mention it. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ. Now in Surah Al-A'raf, we're gonna be continuing with a couple of pages in where the stories of different prophets. The stories of different prophets. The first prophet, the strange thing well, I wouldn't call it strange, but you could see that it actually laid out the different prophets in the chronology that they came in. So it put Nuh first, then it put Hud second, and then it went for Prophet Saleh. So it was really putting in the chronology in where to tell you, well, you see, the order is really the same. The order from the very beginning of the different prophets, the story happens to be the same in how people reacted and how they dealt with the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. So let's start with the first prophet in order for us to see what is the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually asking us to, one, avoid from people's actions, two, or hold on to from other pious people's actions, and three, to understand how does the society relate to haqq and batil, good and evil that is conveyed to them. How do they relate to it? How do we also relate to the message itself? So we're looking at, so remember, whenever you would have a story, there's a theme, and the theme, you're going to be getting it from different sides, whether it's, the let's put it, laid out in form of a hero and the bad guys and the good guys, and the theme, the message itself, and what it means and the consequence and the result of it. And in order for us to either learn from this or avoid that, or even take other lessons from it. So let's continue. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا. That verily, Nuh was sent. إِلَى قَوْمِهِ. He was sent to his people. And I want you to look at the word here, قَوْمِهِ, because you will pretty much find that in the surah you could see that very many times. So here, أخاهم, قومه, his people. أخاهم is their brother. In other words, they were acquainted, they were familiar with him, they knew exactly everything about him. Let's go and see the other prophets again. Look at here, Prophet Salih, أخاهم, and you will also see the same exact thing when he talked about Prophet Lut alayhi salam. And let's jump really quick and see. إذ قال لقومه. With Prophet Lut he said لقومه. And then we continue, even Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And so forth it continues, in where it is actually to indicate that all the prophets, when they were actually sent, they were sent bilisani qawmihi. They were sent with the tongues. They were able to converse. They were able to understand. They were able to understand not only their language, but they were able to understand their mentality. They were part of them. They were within that community. And that's why you could see the word qawmihi. And that's why it's really important to also learn from that the best da'wah is really the da'wah in where the person that comes from that society is able to convey the message. They will do a better job than a person that is foreign coming in to do that da'wah to those people. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I mean, hey, most of the da'wah that actually began here was really coming from the people that were coming from outside. But then, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ. Verily we had sent. The word أرسلنا. Now you might say أرسلنا, did the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam fly down? No. But the أرسلنا نوحا to mean that Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was sent with the message. In other words, أرسلنا, the message was actually with Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, and Prophet Nuh alayhi salam embodied the message. It wasn't just Prophet Nuh, Musa, Isa, every single prophet embodies the message. That's why harming the prophet is like harming the message itself and attacking the message. And which is why the Prophet ﷺ actually said that you will not be a believer until you love me more than you love your own children, your yourself and your own children, and put the Prophet ﷺ on top of all. Why? Because that would actually be embodying. Or understanding or embracing that message that the prophet or the messenger is actually embodying, in where you're embodying the message that was sent. So إلى قومه to his people. فقال يا قومي. So here we go. So فقال. So he told them, semicolon, يا قومي, said, oh my people. And it's really important that when you want to give da'wah, make sure you give da'wah, ya qawmi, give it in a kind heart. And alhamdulillah, I think compared to the way da'wah was done, I would say 20 or even 30 years ago, I think there's lots of improvement where right now the message is really reaching to really reaching and reaching out to the hearts. Ya qawmi, u'budullaha ma lakum min ilahin ghayru. O Lord, O people, worship. And the word u'budu, and again it's a comprehensive term, u'budu. U'budullaha ma lakum min ilahin ghayru. That is the first part of the message. Worship the Lord Almighty. You do not malakum. You do not have any God but Him, the Lord Almighty. Inni akhafu alaykum adhaba yawmin azim. So what did he do? He basically gave he basically two things, two parts of it. So the first segment was that he was doing it with a tabshir. All right, and then it is in order to do the second part, which is in nadir. So there's a tabshir and there's a nadir. What's the difference between tabshir and nadir? So the tabshir right here, in where this is informing, more informing them, worship the Lord Almighty. I do not know any other Lord to worship but Him. Inni akhafu alaykum adhaba yawman azim. Now this is in Nadir. This is the warning, but the warning you could see actually comes from inni akhafu. I fear, in where the advice, when you want to give the advice is supposed to be sincere, and the advice and the sincerest advice is when the advice makes the listener feel that you too are really considerate, and you really are not only considerate, but you really care for their survival, and you really care for their life. So this is the most important adhab, or a torture on a magnificent day. What is the magnificent day? What is that important day? It's basically on Judgment Day. Or is it adhab yawmin azim? Is it a Judgment Day, or is it adhab yawmin azim, or is it a day in where the Lord Almighty, if they don't respond to the Prophet's call, they would be getting punished for it? It's actually two. So adhab yawmin azim could be on Judgment Day, and adhab yawmin azim could also be if they do not respond to the Prophet's call, they will be punished for it. Yutundi, go ahead, Yutundi. You can unmute yourself. قال الملأ من قومه. What was the response? قال الملأ. Now I want you to look at the word الملأ, because الملأ are usually the chieftains, the leaders, and it's really important to mention that when we look at the leaders, the leaders may actually be those that people usually obey. The leaders, just like right now, people blindly would think that Kanye West, for example, I hope I said his name right, is somehow somebody to imitate, and would consider singers and probably Hollywood actors, etc., or politicians as leaders to follow. And that's what usually happens, and that's what has been always happening throughout history. In where قال الملأ, those that were in the positions of leaders, those that from his qawmihi. Al-qawm is usually, by the way, al-qawm is usually, they're usually men and not the women. And that's why in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء. So why the emphasis on nisa? It's not that the emphasis on nisa, but usually the qawm are men. All right, and this is really important to mention. So قال الملأ من قومه They were the male chieftains specifically. إِنَّا لَنَرَاكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. They said, all we just see you in في ضلال مبين. In the word mubin, it's like clearly in complete deviance. You're completely deviant. It is a very blatant deviation that you are in. Dalal. And the word dalal can mean insanity, can mean they're accusing him of being crazy, or can mean that he's just off the right track. That would mean dalal. And can also mean that the person is, off right track or deviant. قال يا قوم ليس بي ضلالة. What was the response? So you could see right there that the الملأ. And notice that the emphasis was on الملأ because usually the laymen and the different people would just follow the leaders. They would just follow the leaders, and those leaders become the ones to indoctrinate them to a certain idea without them realizing. And then they start following those ideas. قال يا قومي ليس بي ضلالة ولكني رسول من رب العالمين. So what did he respond? He said, my people, and notice the word يا قومي. So يا قومي, it's like saying, my dear people, I really care. All right? ليس بي ضلالة. ليس بي ضلالة. And now, notice, I want you to look at the word ضلالة here. ليس بي ضلالة. There's no ضلالة in me. What is ضلالة? ضلالة is not only is he saying ليس بي ضلال, I am not deviant, or I don't have any, I'm not deviant, but he's saying ليس بي ضلالة, not even one deviance. I don't have any deviance. It's another way of negating here. I don't have any deviance. Not even the slightest iota, not even the slightest form of deviance. That's why the word ضلالة is actually singular. ولكني رسول من رب العالمين. ولكني رسول من رب العالمين. But here, confirming and affirming, ولكني, but لكني, but I am رسول from the Lord of the worlds. In other words, taking them back, it's like, well, you're just one qawm, but there are many worlds out there, and I'm just letting you know, I'm actually the prophet of the Lord, the Lord of the worlds. أبلغكم. My duty, أبلغكم, is to convey رسالات ربي. Wait a minute, I thought he was sent with one risala. How did it become two? Or many. أبلغكم رسالاتي. So here's the thing. Every single one of the message is actually considered part of a risala. So for example, let's take in Islam. Alright? La ilaha illallah is a risala. But for example, to make salah, to give zakah is also a risala. In other words, every single part of La ilaha illallah and the different details that the prophets and the messengers were sent with, don't steal, don't commit zina, perform salah, wear hijab, is actually practicing a risala. It is putting the risala in practice. أُبَلِّغُكُمْ رِسَالَاتِ رَبِّي. So that way you would recognize that you cannot separate what the different details that the prophets had come with and say, well, this has nothing to do with La ilaha illallah. It is actually part of La ilaha illallah. When you practice the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are practicing the main, you're practicing the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in where you're giving up. And here's the thing, is that when you look at the word La ilaha illallah, La ilah is negating. There's no God. But then, affirming and confirming, except, worthy of worship that is, except Allah Almighty. What is that telling you? When you look at La ilah, no God, this is not only relating to ritual. Now, how did they understand it? Oh, that's why the people, the pagan Quraysh, they didn't understand La ilaha illallah. They actually believed, they believed in God. It's not that they didn't believe in God, but they considered that the different gods were out there, were laid out in order to bring about a spiritual connection. to bring about a spiritual connection, to connect them between them and the Lord Almighty by remembering the good things that these gods were resembling. Again, they were connecting to the idea. They were connecting themselves to the idea and not considering. That's why they considered that when the prophets and messengers told them, well, wait a minute, how can you worship these gods when they can't even create their own selves? If they can't even create their own selves, they're not going to be able to create you. Then therefore this is to prove that these things are not worthy of worship. But they said, well, wait a minute, no, you came from a different angle here. We're not here saying that these are God per se, but these are connected to the Lord Almighty. These are somehow spiritually connected, and without them realizing that they were actually following a whole fallacy, they were actually contradicting themselves, and they were actually making up a different narrative that makes them comfortable even with something that contained lots of fallacies. And that is something that at many times in many different things man will create a narrative in order to make himself feel comfortable even with something that is within it full of fallacies and even oxymorons, but will create a narrative to make himself or herself comfortable with it. So let's continue. ولكني رسول من رب العالمين أبلغكم رسالات ربي وأنصح لكم, and I would give you advice. Now the word nasaha would mean advice, and can also mean, the word nasaha can also mean to purify. All right, can also mean to purify. So وأنصح لكم, to give you a pure message and to give you an advice that is pure from any, and again the word nasaha again means pure, so that is pure from any materialistic gain. In other words, the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was not seeking a materialistic gain in order to be probably the leader or anything like that. No, it was a clear and a pure mission with a whole conviction to deliver the message in order to do two things: to help them find guidance to worship Allah Almighty, and two, to protect them from any punishment that may come at them. وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and I know from Allah Almighty what you don't know. What is that telling us? So this is actually telling us that he's actually talking to them about some epistemology here, in where there are so many things that you don't know about this life around you. You may know the surface of it, but then there are certain informations that is al-wahi being the only place for knowledge about it. So we'll continue next week, inshallah. So stay tuned. I'm excited to finish the surah. Any questions before we finish? Nope. All right. Anybody would like to add something that I probably didn't say? All right, well, everyone, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and we'll see you all next week. Stay tuned.
Okay, salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Bye bye.
All right.